It was like I was floating just above the surface of the ground. And so I'm walking around now, and as I get close to objects, as I come close to them, suddenly they're opening like a portal. And so I remember going up to this one sarcophagus, and as I come close to it, you can kind of, it's got a perspex screen around it, you can kind of lean on it, get really close to it. And suddenly I was no longer myself looking at the sarcophagus. I was a man, an ancient man standing with a chisel making the sarcophagus. When you die, you come through to the underworld, and there you meet this goddess, Mut. She has a scale, a balance scale. And what she does is she takes your heart and she puts it on the scale. And on the other side is a feather. And if your heart is weighing, is heavier than a feather, this giant monster comes and eats you.
Oh my God, that is so hard.
It's a really serious moment for these people. But all he really wanted to do was feel loved and feel like that his life had some meaning and some purpose. And I could see all of that and all of this emotion. It wasn't me per se, but it was all of this bottled up emotion that he had from his past experiences and the trauma. And he was starting, his arms were coming up above his head, and he was really shouting at me. And so I knew I needed to somehow, on some deep level, I needed to transform the situation. So I just stepped in towards him as close as I could. I put my hand out and I just put my hand really powerfully on his heart center. And I just said to him with like full sincerity and like all the power I could muster, I said,
hello everyone, and welcome back to the Acceptance of Life podcast. This is episode 7, and this week I think we're going to do it a little bit different because Vajan is going to tell us something about one of his travels, and we're going to tie that in with some of the topics that we've been discussing. More about that later, but Vajan, welcome to the studio. How are you?
I am very well, thank you. And
Okay.
It's an interesting time of year. It's the changing of the seasons, and you can really feel it here in Christchurch. You can really feel in the last few days that the autumn is beginning. So I hope
It's really weird for me to hear the autumn is beginning because I'm in the midst of winter, and for me the spring is just around the corner.
I know. This is the sort of magical planet we live on, that everything is possible at every moment.
And you are in your morning and I'm in my evening, so...
Yes. And actually, what I've been thinking about a lot at the moment is I call them the king of the migratory birds, which is the Godwit. Have you heard of the Godwit?
The what? This is a word.
The Godwit. G-O.
Man, I have to look that up in the dictionary. Like, I don't know the Dutch word for it.
No, so this bird is really amazing, and it is the migratory bird that does the longest migration every year. And it's really special for us here in Christchurch because every year in the springtime and sometime in September, it makes the epic journey from Alaska to Christchurch. And then every year in around March, it makes the return journey. And so the journey's about 13,000 kilometers. And they'll fly 13,000 kilometers, like somewhere between 11 and 13,000 kilometers, depending on which route they go. They'll fly nearly all of that nonstop. So when they leave here in Christchurch, sometime in the next week or two, they will fly for 11 days, 12 days, nonstop, flying at 80 kilometers an hour all the way from Christchurch, New Zealand to Alaska. So it's one of the most monumental feats of endurance.
It's like taking a car and driving for 11 days straight without food. What do they do for food?
So what they're doing at the moment is they're eating like crazy. So a good friend of mine, Granantan, who you know, he and I were running out at the beach last Monday, and we saw a lot of these birds eating like shellfish like crazy. And you see that they're really trying to fatten themselves up and get as much fuel on board for this epic migration they're about to undertake.
Wow.
And
well, I do think I was a migratory bird in one of my animal incarnations a long time ago. Yeah. So I do sympathize and appreciate the Godwit, although I have no idea how it looks like.
And so what it starts me thinking about is I also start to feel that urge at this time of year. So I feel like I have some of that migratory bird tendencies. And I almost feel it in my back. It's like in my back, I start to feel this urge, like, okay, it's time to start preparing. Like
it's your wings. Your wings are starting to sprout.
It is. But I really do feel it like on a physical level, like something changes in the atmosphere. And it happened earlier in this week. And I just felt the atmosphere had suddenly changed. And I could feel like from one day to the next that we'd gone from summer to autumn. And although the weather's still going to be really nice here for the next few months, something changes in the atmosphere itself and the
It's amazing
consciousness.
how you can pick that up, right? It's so
Yeah.
subtle.
Yeah.
I
But
feel that. I mean, with us, it was not, it was less subtle because we went from -2 to +17 in a single
did
day.
you had a warm day. Good for you.
Oh, we had such a warm day. It was like Friday a
Beautiful.
week ago, and it went from like 20-degree difference from one day to the next.
Yeah.
That's really unprecedented, but
Yeah. That makes a
definitely good.
difference.
Yeah.
And so what it starts me thinking about is, and which is we're gonna talk a little bit more about, is the idea of travel and the idea of what it means to be a traveler or a pilgrim, and what that means for me in my life. And so I wanted to tell a few stories about from some of my experiences, and hopefully show how some of the ideas that we've been talking about in a more abstract fashion, how they actually become at some point, and you want them to become lived realities. Because if a spiritual ideal or a spiritual idea is simply an abstract concept that you know about theoretically, it's not really useful in any way. It's not powerful. It's not transformative. Whereas when it becomes an embodied reality, when it becomes something you actually live out, then it becomes incredibly powerful and transformative. So hopefully today will give our listeners a little bit of an insight and a glimpse into what it looks like to actually try and live these things out in the world.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I think that's one of the functions also of having a sangha or a community. So these are people who are practitioners, and by practicing it, you bring the teachings alive. You know, it's like having a score of music that a composer, like say Bach, composed this beautiful symphony, or the Matthäus Passion, or something like that, and it's like nobody would ever play it. It sits in a bookshelf somewhere, and it's never played. So when you live out these spiritual truths, it's like the orchestra's coming out and performing this wonderful piece of music, and then you relive it. Then you can really understand, oh man, Bach was a real genius for composing that, and what a wonderful experience.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's the thing. So we want to make today's discussion about practical things, about the world and
I like the fact that I'm seeing you in full screen right now, so I'm not seeing my own face, and that's, I don't know what that is, but it's so distracting to see your own face.
Yeah,
Don't you find that distracting?
I do, and I can see you loud and clear. So that's
Yeah,
also
it's like a more
wonderful.
natural way of communicating.
Yeah.
Good. I'm looking forward to the stories.
So let's start just by talking about actually what the difference is between, like, I would say that there's three different sorts of ways of moving through the world. So there's the tourist, there's the traveler, and then there's the pilgrim.
Mm.
And I think each of those groups of people, they can transition from one group to another, obviously. And at different times you may be one, and at different times you may be another. But I think it's good for people just to think about how they approach the concept of traveling, because obviously travel is such a big part of this modern world. And one of the great gifts of the modern world is the ability to go from one place to another just unbelievably quickly. And
Well, isn't life also a journey? So it can be an analogy for living life.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's always a good thing to remember as well. Like perhaps the way you approach your travels is a reflection of the way you're actually approaching your life. So trying to perhaps do it with more intention and more focus and more consciousness, bring more awareness and consciousness to the practice of it, that could help you with the rest of your life. So let's look at the different groups. So first of all, a tourist. I mean, tourists often get a bad rap these days, and especially in places in Europe where there's, this idea of over-tourism. And I think the reason for that is the idea of a tourist is someone, it's like a consumer of experiences. They're going to a place and there's certain things that they want to tick off. They want to go see this church, they want to go see this ancient place, they want to go to this place. And so in some ways, like we were talking last week, the difference between success and progress, I think for them, they have a very clearly defined picture of what a successful holiday looks like. It might be a beach holiday, but it's very clearly defined that they want to go and they want to sit on the beach for 7 days and they want to relax and have nothing to do and, just drink some drinks.
And if they're Germans and they're on the Dutch coast, they want to dig a big pit in the sand and lay in it. Don't ask me why. Don't ask me why, but this is the case.
It is completely inscrutable, but they know what they're doing.
You've seen it.
They have a very clear vision of what a successful Dutch North Sea holiday looks like.
Yes.
And so when you're in that sort of mindset about a holiday, you're not looking for the unexpected. you're not looking for the transformative. You've got a clear aim for your holiday. So if you've got a holiday and it's got a very tight itinerary, you're going from here to here, you've got this day this day that, you're probably behaving as a tourist. And that's neither wrong or right. It's just the way that you're approaching the world in that moment. And that's completely a personal decision, let's say. But yeah, the aim is not to be transformed radically in any way. The way is to go there, have some experiences, and you see the outcome of that with some of the tourist hotspots where there's these particular places where people, all they want to do is get the Instagram shot there. And for me, it's just such an unusual and interesting phenomenon that we've created in the world, that we have people traveling to a certain place just to simply take the same photo that they've seen someone else take. But simply, instead of being the other person, they'll be in the photo instead.
Yeah.
And
well, it's almost like they feel they have to be part of that group. It's almost like social pressure. Like when you have that picture, you're part of that group. You're part of that in crowd that has seen the Mona Lisa or that has been in front of the pyramids in Giza, something like that.
Yeah. So this is a good example as well, because it's got unintended consequences, that sort of behavior. Because there's a town in Japan where there's a really good view of Mount Fuji from that town. And there's this famous shot that was made famous through Instagram with a 7-Eleven convenience store and Mount Fuji in the background. And so someone, took this photo of themselves with the 7-Eleven store and Mount Fuji in the background. And then it became a trend. So now all of these people started going to the small town in rural Japan to take this photo in front of the 7-Eleven store. And the local people actually got so fed up with the whole thing because it totally ruined their quality of life. So now they've actually put a big black screen up at that spot to block the view of Mount Fuji, just to stop these Instagrammers from all lining up. Because when you see the photo shows you in some ways the unreality of social media. Because when you see the photo, it looks beautiful. Like there's this place in Bali where there's this amazing, it's a temple, I think, and there's this pond which has this very thin layer of water that does an amazing job of reflecting the sky. And you stand in this Balinese gate and you get this photo, and it's like the sky is reflected in the water in front of you. And so you see the photo and you think, oh my God, that looks so idyllic and beautiful. I would love to go there. If you go there, there's a 3-hour queue of people lined up to get that photo. And there's all these hacks that the local people have found to make the photo better. So they might put a mirror underneath the camera and do all these things to make it look better than it does in the real life.
Yeah.
Just to try and trick everyone else who's seeing it. And it's like, wow, it's really it's a fascinating cultural thing.
The virtual reality has replaced the physical reality, has become more real for some people and more important than real reality. And
And then that's when I think you're becoming a consumer of reality. You're trying to capture a moment of reality so you can take it and then store it online in your, to give you some feeling of something, to have some feeling of kudos or pride, or, just to show that you went there and you did the thing. And so in some ways, the radical thing now is to go to the place, but not do the thing, because it's become such a trend, and it's such a common thing to do now. I think in some ways, if you want to do something unique and radical, it's like, don't do that. Like, don't go to the places that everyone goes to and has to take the photo.
If you want to be cool and hip, then
so that's an advice for new players. Go find your own path out there. And so that leads us on to travelers. So if we look at a tourist has often got a very clear goal of what they're wanting to see and experience. I think that's a big differentiation between someone who's traveling. If you go out on the road and you consider yourself a traveler, there's a greater sense of openness to the experiences that are going to be had along the way. So you're out there to allow the journey to transform you. So rather than going in with a set goal or a set aim of what you want to see and what photos you want to get and what trinkets you want to buy to bring back with you, instead you're going out and your mindset is, okay, I'm going out into the world, and I've got some sort of rough sketch of the places I'm hoping to visit, but you've left enough openness in that planning and that thinking that there's room for the world and the universe to step in and to give you experiences that are going to be transformative, that are going to show you parts about yourself you perhaps didn't see or were not aware of, and it perhaps allows you to step out of yourself and in those moments try and see the world through the eyes of the culture or the people that you're traveling with. And I think that's when travel becomes really transformative, when it allows you to step out of the character that you're playing of you all the time and instead try and identify with the people and the place you're in and try and see the world from their perspective.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to travel. So when I was 18, I went on, in Europe we have this thing called interrail. Well, it was a thing when I was a teenager in the 90s. And you can buy a ticket for the train and you can travel for 30 days. You can travel all over Europe for free on this one ticket. And I went with a bunch of friends, and at some point I was by myself in a town in Italy. And I remember sitting on a square, on a fountain on that square, and I was just looking at basically the people going by, life happening. And it was one of my first real meditative experiences. I remember being in such a meditative trance just from observing the people going by and all these different storylines and this wonderful flow of life just unfolding right in front of my eyes. I got so much peace from that. I still remember it. I was so full of peace when I left that state. And I really felt, wow, that was one of the most interesting experiences of that whole trip, just being there and observing life for like an hour or so.
And that was something you could never plan. So if you had your plan of what you were going to do and you're going to go here and see this, you would never plan that this hour of just, non-focused sitting would be the most transformative and one of the most memorable moments from your trips. So I think that's one of the key things when you're looking and thinking about how you're going to go out into the world is how tightly do you want to try and prescribe your journey. If you want to allow the universe to step in and to teach you things and to have the unexpected experience, which are often the most transformative ones, you need to have space in your life and in your mind.
So that's interesting. So why cannot a fully scheduled trip have these transformative experiences? So why can I not have that experience when I'm in front of the Pyramid of Giza, when I'm at the Eiffel Tower? Why doesn't it happen then?
Yeah, I think what it is you need to create space for you to be completely present in the moment. Because that's when the most interesting things happen, when you find yourself completely present in the moment and what you're doing. And the thing is, when you're too tightly bound by time and schedules and you're not giving yourself enough room and space on your trip, you're constantly using your mind to experience the world. So you're looking at your watch, you're like, okay, at 9 a.m. I'm going to get up and I'm going to go to this place, I'm going to do this. And everything is very tightly packed in. And so you're almost not giving yourself enough time to just simply be at any of the places along the way.
Yeah.
Because you've set your mind up and your intention for the day when you left is like, okay, I need to be really, productive. I need to see this. I need to do this. I'm going to go to this place. And so instead of it being a day of simply being completely present to the beauty and the marvels of the world around you, you're simply going from place to place, ticking boxes. And at the end of the day, you'll feel like, oh, that was really successful. But perhaps you were never really fully there at any of those places that you visited.
What I think also it happens is that you're suffering from expectation when you go to these really famous places.
Yes.
So like you've built up this picture, oh, everybody's going there. It must be fantastic. It must be amazing.
Yeah.
And then when you get there, it's beautiful, but you may not have the experience that you expected. And so you suffer from disappointment. It's unconscious because you're not really giving yourself time to be disappointed. You say, this has to be good. But then, it can never be as good as you built it up in your mind. So I think it's also a case of some disappointment there in expectation.
Yeah. And I think expectation is a really key thing. I think when you're a tourist, you have some expectations of what you're going to experience, what you think it's going to be like. So you've already set yourself up in some way for having a particular type of experience. And it's always like we talked about with expectation earlier, nothing is really ever as good as you imagine it's going to be or as bad as you imagine it's going to be. And one of the things as well is because people try and experience a place before they go there via social media or YouTube, they'll see pictures, they'll see footage, and no one really ever shows you the real reality of a place. And so Europe is such a great example because you'll see these amazing videos of someone visiting any of the great sites in Europe. And you see it and it looks, oh my God, imagine being there. It'd be so beautiful. It'd be so wonderful. No one tells you there's going to be like 10,000 other people. No one films it as it really looks like in the heart of summer in Europe. And you've just got like people just crammed in like crazy. And so you always get there and you're like, oh, I didn't expect there to be so many people here, or
That was another Instagram reel.
exactly. So we kind of get these, best case scenario views of a place. And then when we go there in the real world, it normally isn't aligned with that image that we had. So
Yeah.
that's always interesting, especially for me coming from New Zealand, because New Zealand is so lightly populated. And especially growing up here, all of the places you would go as a tourist were completely deserted. Like, I even get shocked now when I turn up to a beautiful waterfall or something, and I'll see 20 or 30 camper vans. And I'm like, oh my God, it's changed so radically. But it wasn't until I really started going to Europe and I just saw, oh my God, you go
Mass
to
tourism.
you go
Mass
to
tourism.
Notre Dame or the Louvre, or some like central Amsterdam in the middle of summer. It's just so wildly packed with tourists. It's almost incomprehensible for someone who comes from a more less densely populated place.
Yeah. That must have been a real shocker to you.
But yeah, it's fascinating. So in New Zealand, our tourism is much busier, but it's still it's just a drop on the bucket compared to.
Yeah, no, I had the opposite experience. I went 12 years ago. I was in Australia for the Peace Run, which is an event that we organized with our meditation center, running for peace with a peace torch. And I ran through the Northern Territories in Australia. And that was for me such a shocker to have so much empty land coming from, the Netherlands, one of the most densely populated countries in the world, and then being out there. And for days, we would not see any village or town. It was just, endless road, red fields around you, very little bush, dead kangaroo by the side of the road once in a while, and the occasional truck going by. But the night skies were just amazing. You had these wonderful, because it was so empty, the stars were just so unbelievably amazing, the star-studded skies. But it was a fantastic experience, because you don't need anything in nature to enjoy this sense of and vastness. So it was really this experience of vastness that I loved from that trip.
Hey, this would be a good opportunity for you to mention a great event happening next year in Australia. Char would be very happy if you mention it.
This year it's happening.
Oh, it's this year. Sorry, yeah. It's already this year, yes.
Yeah, the Australian Peace Run, Sign up for it, go there and run for peace to make Char, our friend, very happy, because he's one of the main coordinators.
Exactly, and they're doing a great job. It's a really amazing event, so definitely check that out.
It is an amazing event. It is an amazing event. We'll talk about it some more in future episodes.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So we've got the idea of what a tourist is up to. So they're out there, they're consuming experiences, and then they're sharing them with their friends. And I'm always a little bit suspicious when people are really so enthusiastic to share their travels on their social media, because in one way, people will always like to say, oh, I'm doing it, just to share the experiences with my friends, and out of the goodness of my heart, and to really let them experience it vicariously through me. And I'm always slightly suspicious, like, really, is that really what you're doing? Because it seems like there's also the opportunity in some ways with that type of sharing of your amazing trip to in some ways be skiting or bragging a little bit, or trying to create a little bit of jealousy or envy amongst your friends as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So we've got the tourist, we've got the traveler. So the traveler is the person who's gone out onto the road, and they're not always exactly clear what they're looking for. And that's often one of the great things about traveling, is sometimes at a period of your life where you don't know which direction to take or where you're going, simply getting out of your house and moving around in the world will actually help you refine your aim and start to feel and understand actually which direction you should take. And so sometimes that's by going the wrong direction. Sometimes maybe you go a country or try something, you realize, okay, that's the wrong thing, but that's still really useful information. That's really helpful to actually get you on the right track. And so for me, I've got a few sort of foundational ideas that I use when I travel, because travel is really important to me. And so one of the things that I try and do when I travel is I try and leave myself behind. And so what I mean by that is the character that I've grown up in and the character that I play on a daily basis here in New Zealand, in some ways, that's not all of me. That's some representation of some part of me and some of my qualities. But each of us knows we're far more than the face and the mask that we show to the world. And so one of the great things for me about traveling, especially when I'm traveling by myself in places where I'm not known, is that it frees me from playing that character. It allows me to simply arrive in a place and simply be the person that is experiencing those experiences on a day-to-day basis. I don't feel a need. And one of the interesting things about the character that you play, one of the things that most strongly keeps you as that character is the people around you. So the people around you really hold on to you. They hold a picture of you that's not exactly who you are. It's some representation they have of you from the interactions I've had and the memories they've got and the stories they have about you. And people actually really hold on to those things really tightly. And if you start changing too much and start acting too far outside of the bounds of what people, of the character people sort of put onto you, people actually get a little bit upset. They're like, "Hey, well, what's happened? Why are you, what's going on there?"
Yeah.
And so when you step out of that, you're actually free from any expectations. You're free from the people around you actually keeping you, holding you in place as that person, because you're changing. You're constantly changing. The universe is changing, and you want to be evolving along with the universe. And so if you find yourself exactly the same over, or acting in the exact same ways over a 10-year period, there's probably you're probably not fully in alignment with who you are or who you could be, because things have changed, things have moved on in some way. And so we need to constantly be paying attention and constantly updating ourselves. We need to constantly it's almost like an active process of paying attention to the world, paying attention to ourselves and our reactions to it, slightly sort of changing our aim slightly, or just refining who we are in the world.
Yeah, it's like we're a software program that needs to be updated constantly and renewed to
stay current,
running, to
stay current. Otherwise, all these viruses might get in there, and you might start acting in all sorts of ways that are no longer serving your best interests. So that's one of the big things that I find is when I go traveling, it gives me an opportunity to leave behind the story of myself. And to
so would you become a completely different person though?
Well, the thing is, I'm basing myself still on the same fundamental inner reality. So the inner truth and the inner values that I have about the world, like how should I operate in the world from my deepest possible level? And it's trying to come from a place of respect and love, self-giving, openness, connection. Like all of these things are fundamental to who I am. But those things are not the same thing as the character that you've created over the years of being alive here on Earth.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I know what you mean. I have the same experience sometimes when I travel, because you can really be open and try almost new personas when you completely go into a conversation with someone and kind of adapt to their style of conversing.
Yeah.
I have that really weird thing where I very often will take on the accent of somebody that I'm speaking to.
Yeah.
So even in Holland, we have, when I'm in a taxi and the taxi driver has a really strong Amsterdam accent, I tend to kind of speak like that as well. And it's really weird. It almost happens naturally, but it's.
I think it does, because in some ways you're mirroring them. You're mirroring them. And the thing is, people like to see themselves reflected in some way. So if you start reflecting something about themselves back to them, it actually makes the whole relationship much closer, much more quickly than it would otherwise.
Sometimes it does feel a little disingenuous to me. It does feel a little bit insincere when I do that. I'm like, just talk in your own normal voice. And I kind of have to make an effort to do that. But it's true that there's a sense where you want to accommodate the other person, I think.
Yeah, I think it helps connection. Like the thing is, because what the person's seeing is that you're actually seeing them. Because what you're showing you're not doing it in a way of sort of mockery or make light of them in any way. But instead, you're really paying attention to them, and you're really showing on some level, some deep fundamental level, that you're really seeing them and hearing them.
Yeah.
And and obviously you don't want to become like a caricature of the other person that you're talking to. But it's just like moving a little bit closer to them in some way. And I think they feel that. It's some like sort of reciprocal thing, because perhaps you don't realize, but they think they're talking more like you.
Yeah, that's possible.
So that's like, because if you're having that experience from one side, it's very likely that they're having the experience from the other side, and they think they're talking more like you. And so the two of you are coming a little bit closer together. And I do find the same thing, that when I'm in, for example, in India, if I talk in my normal New Zealand voice, I don't feel as much of a connection with the people there and the place. Whereas actually the way I talk in many countries becomes radically different. And I see that and I feel that, like, I remember in Morocco talking to some local Berber people out in the desert in the Sahara. And as soon as I came across them, the way I talked, like if I was watching myself, I was like, I never talk like this. This is so unusual the way I'm interacting with them. But it was exactly the way they interacted with me. So there was something about like coming from a place, like bringing yourself to the same place as them. And then,
what was it like? Like, how are you doing? Very, very exuberant and
yeah, like
extrovert?
exuberant, but also like there's a particular form of welcoming and greeting and connecting with each other. So I remember this gentleman, and I asked him what his name was, and he said his name was Muhammad, and I said, oh, blessings to the Prophet, peace be upon him. And I would never normally say that in a normal interaction, but I felt the exact right thing to do and say, and he felt that as well. Like as soon as you start acting out in the behaviors and the ideas that are common to that place, you're showing yourself as someone who is trying to see the world through their eyes. And I think that's when real connection comes, when they see that you're not there as a stranger in a strange land. You've come as someone who's really open, and you're trying to transform yourself, and you're trying to experience the world through that culture and through the people there. And so that's probably the next big idea that I'm trying to do is I've said before, that one of my deeply held philosophies is that the world is full of amazing and brilliant people who know things that I don't know. And if I go out into the world and I'm generous and share myself fully and openly, that perhaps they'll share some of those things that I don't know with me.
Yes, I've heard you say that. That's a beautiful thing. Can you give some concrete examples where you had that experience, where you learned something that you did not know before?
So yeah, I mean, there's so many times it happens, and it's like a lot of little things, because the thing is, the things you don't know about the world are often the small details that connect things and make things meaningful. And that's often the place that we have misunderstandings with the world as well. Like obviously the big things you notice, like the way, say the relationship between men and women in different cultures. If you're in an Islamic culture or, compared to a Western culture, obviously there's different behaviors are normal and acceptable, and, in the two different cultures. So it's those things are obvious and noticeable. But like this might be a good example. So a lot of the time when people travel to the developing world, they have this idea in their mind about how the world works. And like, for example, you as a Dutchman, if you were going to build a house in Holland, you would wait till you had all of the funds available, and then you would build the whole house. And so that's your mindset. That's your picture of how the world works. Like when you're going to build a house, you build the whole thing in one go, and then it's finished and done. And then you move in and all is well. And you've perhaps got a huge mortgage you pay off for the next 30 years. So if you are somewhere in the Middle East or in Asia, or for example, in this example in India, I was staying with this lovely gentleman called Mr. Arvind Sharma, and he had amazing, like a mini hotel, you probably call it a guest house, up in the mountains, and there was a huge flood and it destroyed his whole place. And so he lost his accommodation, he was renting it out to travelers. And so he built a small new place. And if you saw it, you would think it was completely unfinished. You're like, why on earth did he not build the whole thing? So you see he has a few rooms finished on the ground floor that you can rent out, and he's got a kitchen down there, and that's where you have your food. But you see the upstairs floor is all these steel rods, the rebar, and like a bunch of bricks. But it's only like some of the pillars are done, but then the rest of it's completely unfinished. And so for someone from Holland, you would say, like, what is wrong with these people? Like, they're so lazy. Like, they don't even finish building their house properly.
Don't worry, Dutch people will say that to their face.
Exactly. And so, but there's a fundamental misunderstanding in that situation of how these countries work. So you talk to the person and you see he is in the process of building the house. And the thing is, like in these countries, it's not easy to get a huge loan for someone who is, earning a low income. So he doesn't have the money available to build the whole house. But what he does have is enough to start the house. So he builds as much as he can. And then as he earns more money, he buys more bricks and he starts building the second story. And so when you see it from his point of view, that it's much safer for him to buy bricks than it is to store his money, under his mattress, or, even perhaps have it in the bank. And, in some places with inflation or with just dodgy dealings, it's actually probably safer just to invest all your money into bricks when you've got spare money and then just keep building your house. And so over time, you end up with this nice 2-story house, which is all fully finished. But we see it somewhere in the process, and it might be a 20-year process. And so you'll see all through the Middle East and all through these countries, these houses that all look half finished. And because we don't have the full picture, we assume that these people are somehow lazy, or they just haven't got around to it. Where in fact, they're doing the very best they can. And so that's kind of a small example of people being very, because that's the thing, people are smart wherever you go, and they're dealing with their own unique circumstances. And so if you see them doing something you don't understand, there's probably information that you don't see that they know of. And so if you actually talk to them really openly, like, oh, I see that your house, you're working on the upstairs, why is, what is your plans, or what are you aiming towards? And then they'll tell you, oh, hopefully, in a few years I'll have finished upstairs and I'll have a few more rooms. And it makes perfect sense when you understand the full picture.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's those little things of just understanding the small things about how people go about their lives, and some of the more spiritually oriented countries. A good example is Bali. When you really pay attention, you try and see the world through their eyes, you start to see how they're seeing the sacred and the divine everywhere they go. And so you see trees wrapped with a certain sort of fabric, which means it's a sacred tree, and people will make offerings there. You'll see temples everywhere honoring the sacred and the divine in all creation. So yeah, you start to see, and everywhere you go, there's little ideas that you perhaps haven't realized or haven't seen.
Yeah, and there's some magnetic pull, I think, from that in Bali, because there's no coincidence that millions of people, their dream destination is Bali.
Yeah.
And it's not just because of the idyllic nature and the palm trees and the ocean. I think it's something about the consciousness that is there, that people feel. It is one of the most, you and I have been there a couple of times also with our retreats, and it's one of the most spiritually fruitful and developed countries I think I've ever been to, places, I must say, where I've ever been to. And it's something in the air, you feel it. It's such a warm blanket, such a warm bath of good vibes, good energy. The people are genuinely nice. And so, yeah, that's amazing that they have their belief system is structured around honoring the divine in all of life. And it's wonderful that gives such good vibes for the whole place. So yeah, I think they're connected.
We talked about panpsychism a few episodes ago.
We did.
And that's the idea that is becoming more popular amongst even philosophers here in the Western world, that there is consciousness in everything. And so hopefully one day we'll see the panpsychics come down from the university, from the ivory towers, and they'll start building shrines everywhere they go and honoring the consciousness, the divine consciousness in everything. That's my hope.
I share that. Yeah, a nice shrine for your local 7-Eleven.
Yes, exactly. So we've got tourists, we've got travelers. So these two people are doing different things, and you can go to the same places, but there's perhaps different activities or different actions you might take in the same places. But the next differentiation between the traveler and the pilgrim is really interesting, because a traveler and a pilgrim might be doing the exact same thing. So like a good example might be on the Camino de Santiago in Spain. So you might have someone who is traveling that route to get home, and they're walking side by side with someone who is doing it as a pilgrim. And you would say, oh, well, are they not both pilgrims then? But the thing is, for me, a pilgrim is someone who has taken a particular intention to their travels. So they've gone out of their home and they have a particular intention that they're bringing to the journey that they're on. And the intention of a pilgrim, I believe, is to have a transformative spiritual experience. So you might go on pilgrimage to Jerusalem or to Mecca or to Varanasi or to any of the sacred and holy places of the world. And the whole trip then takes on a different flavor and a different color, and you see different things. So much like we were talking about in some earlier episodes as well, about the ideas and the beliefs you have about the type of universe you're living in, colors the experiences that you have. It gives meaning to all of the experiences you have along the way. And it's the same with the pilgrims. So when you go out into the world as a pilgrim, and perhaps you're going on a long journey to some sacred place that you've always dreamed of visiting, every step of the journey becomes sacred and divine in some way. So even the flight there, and you start to see different realities in the same experiences that a traveler is having. So, for example, if you are going on a pilgrimage and your flight gets delayed, the traveler will, or the tourist will obviously get annoyed because it's ruining their schedule. I mean, they were supposed to be here, then they had to go there, and their whole schedule is ruined. So for them, it's a total disaster. So the traveler might say, okay, well, this is something to be embraced. This is something to be accepted as part of the journey, and that they're okay with that, and
make the best of it, kind of
make
attitude.
the best of it. Whereas the pilgrim will see it even differently again. They might say, "Oh, this is perfect. God is really testing me. God is really testing my patience and my ability to be joyful on this pilgrimage, and in despite of the hardships and the troubles on the way." Everyone's having the same experience, but because of their different aims and goals, it creates a different reality for them. It's framed differently, and so they have a different experience.
Yeah.
We were just in Turkey recently, and on the way home, I saw all of these people who were going on the pilgrimage to Mecca. And so the men were all wearing white robes or, white cloth. And you could see that although they were at the airport with everyone else, they were somehow not in the same place as everyone else.
I saw them as well. I didn't know who they were. So there were people in Mecca. Now I understand.
So everyone else is milling about
bathrobes.
Exactly. Yeah. So they're following some ancient pilgrimage tradition, and you see that the rest of the airport, people are buzzing around and going shopping and buying this and doing that, and they were kind of all standing together, and I could see that they were in a different universe than everyone else because their idea of what they were doing was so different. And so for them, it's this very sacred and holy journey they're going on. So they're preparing themselves and they're taking physical actions to prepare themselves, but also inwardly, it changes your perspective on the world. You didn't see these people, in the local bookshop looking through the magazines or, trying on new outfits at some of the fashion shops at the airport. They were having a very different experience. And so it's beautiful to see those two realities being manifest at the same moment. And being side by side, but not being in the same place.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I had a wonderful experience of a pilgrimage. Now it's 7 or 8 years ago. I was writing for a Dutch magazine. It was kind of an esoteric magazine, spiritual magazine. And my subject was to document or to kind of experience the fairies in Ireland. And with fairies, I mean the elves, the gnomes, the nature spirits, as they're called. And I went with a friend. He's a mutual friend of ours with Sutherland. He comes from Dublin, so he was kind of the tour guide on that trip. And we had a photographer with us as well. So there were the three of us in a car. I had no idea really where. Well, I had a few places where I wanted to go, but I had no real sense that I would meet fairies. But it was just the intention of going there and experiencing the magic of the fairy world that. This was one of the most magical trips I've ever taken. It was a week long. We stayed in guest houses and we visited these places that were known for fairy folklore. And I did not see any fairies. I don't have the sight for that. I mean, I do believe that they exist, but I felt so strongly their presence. And just from that intention, like nature became so much alive on that trip. I remember we climbed a mountain that was well known in the fairy lore, and we stumbled upon this beautiful grove where there was a natural swing, and we were swinging on the swing, and we got this really joyful feeling, and all the time we were having these little adventures along the way, and it felt like little fairy dust was being sprinkled upon us. And so for me, that was a total pilgrimage experience. Like if I had gone there as a traveler, I would have not had the same magical feeling that I had just because I had that intention of going there as a pilgrim and having a fairy pilgrimage. So that was a wonderful experience.
Yeah, and that's a beautiful example of that you could travel to Ireland at two different times, and if one time you had that clear intention that you were going to honor and experience that hidden reality, every little experience along the way will take on a different meaning than if you were simply there to go around and see some sights and visit some friends.
One of the funniest things that happened on this trip was we were staying in this guest house and we had breakfast in the morning, and the owner of the bed and breakfast came to us and he was serving us breakfast. And I thought to myself, this is a local guy and I'm here chasing the fairy folklore. So I should ask him something if he knows some stories, because many Irish people, they know these kind of local stories of people.
Yeah, and they love their storytelling.
They do. They're great storytellers. So I introduced myself. I said, I'm writing this article and it's about the fairies. And I was wondering, do you have any experiences with the fairies? And, he took a little pause and he said, well, actually, there's two kinds. There's the long ones and the short ones. There's the and I was like, what is he saying? The long and the short? And it turns out he was talking about the actual ferry boats. He thought I was asking about the ferry boats. So he went to this whole long, lecture about the different ferries going from the coast of Ireland to England. And, then I had to explain that it was about something else. And anyway, that was a very funny incident.
There was a great lost in translation moment there.
Yeah, exactly.
It would have been amusing if the conversation had gone on for a very long time with both of you talking about completely different topics, with neither side recognizing that they weren't quite meeting in the middle. So I want to talk a little bit about some of my travels, because I think the personal experience is often quite interesting for people, and they carry some really useful information.
Yeah.
And so really, when I leave my home here in Christchurch, which will be in a bit over a month's time, once my wings are fully ready for flight.
Yes.
But I really try and take that intention. So I really try and leave myself, my character behind, and I really try and go out into the universe from a place of openness and in a place of total willingness to transform in whichever way that I need to. And the universe is such a powerful teacher. You'll keep finding yourselves. If there's areas of you that you need to transform, you'll keep finding, the universe keeps finding opportunities to change those things.
There's no wonder that The Lord of the Rings was filmed in New Zealand, because you're like Bilbo Baggins. You're going on this journey.
Yeah. And so the other thing is that I want to have the idea that I'm going on a pilgrimage. Because if I had the idea that I'm just traveling and I'm just trying to be open and learn things and see things from the perspective of other cultures, that's wonderful. And that's really great for expanding yourself and expanding your picture of the world. But it's still not transformative in the way that I need my life to be. And so when we talk about that progress-based lifestyle or the progress-based mindset, I'm constantly wanting to transform myself, because I know there's so much more within me that my deepest, truest nature is still not yet fully manifest. And so my goal is to fully bring that into manifestation here in the world. And so these journeys for me, if they're aiding me towards that goal, then they're really useful. If they're simply sort of idle curiosity, and if I'm simply just trying to collect experiences, that's not what I'm trying to do. That's not what I'm interested in. So I'm really wanting to have transformative growth. And so by taking that mindset of a pilgrim, and that when I leave this country and my place here, the world is full of sacredness. It is a sacred place. And I want to, as I travel through the world, I want to pay homage and offer my gratitude to the different places that I experience and see and feel, and the people that I come across along the way. But simply, I think having that mindset of being a pilgrim, I'm always trying to see the divine lessons in the experiences that I'm having. And so I think that's really key. So having the right intention about your journey, really, like you said, with your pilgrimage to visit the fairy folk, you wouldn't have had those experiences without that clear intention of what you were doing there. So that clear intention is really powerful. So I was going to talk about a series of experiences I had on a trip several years ago. And this trip was really an important one for me, because it was after a period of time where the world had shut down for some years. I even forget now exactly what was going on at that time, but there was
we had some weird. Oh yeah, I remember
something
vaguely.
happened anyway. I think it's been long forgotten in the past now, and that's a wonderful thing, because that's probably where it belongs. But anyway, there's a period of time where the world closed down, and so I wasn't, let's not say trapped in New Zealand, because it's not a prison per se. It's one of the most beautiful countries in the world, and a lot of people dream of coming here.
It's a prison with golden gilded bars.
Yes, perhaps. And I had so many great experiences, but I did find myself just going around and around and around and around. So I think by the time I could leave New Zealand, I'd done like 3 or 4 laps of the big island that I live on. And it was starting to get to the point, I was here not that long ago. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I was here as well. So that was my thing. So finally I could burst free into the world again. And so I had a wonderful summer in Europe, and then I did some races and connected with a lot of my spiritual brothers. I saw you and Shamalia and other people, and went to some gatherings of our spiritual community, which we call Joy Days. And that was all really wonderful. But when it came time for me to head home, I'd ended my trip in Sweden. So I was up in the sort of the vast pine forests in the far north of Sweden.
You were running a race there, right?
I was, yeah. But at that point, it was a time to start heading back south, like was heading into the autumn in the north. So again, wings started tingling in my back, and it was time to start flying south to warmer climes. And I was heading to India. So I was heading from Europe to India. And then from India, I was going to travel back to New Zealand. And I hadn't booked my travel. And I was looking at the flights, and the flights were really expensive going from Sweden to India. And I just couldn't find any good deals. And I remember I was out running one day in the forest, and I had this really strong image of the Great Khufu Pyramid in Giza. And I'd always been interested in Egypt. And obviously, people have read Initiation is a wonderful book and talks about all of the ancient Egyptian world and the
By
experiences.
Elizabeth Hyde. Yeah,
Yes.
wonderful book.
But so I knew some things about it, but it had not popped up onto my radar of places to visit. But it was on this run. It was just this really momentary, but very strong and clear image inside my mind's eye of the pyramids. And we're normally quite used to the way our normal thoughts appear, the way they present themselves to us. So we know the thoughts we have on a regular basis, we know what they look like and what they feel like and what they sound like. And this was not like any of those thoughts, because it was completely silent. It was just this imposing, inspiring image of the pyramid, the Great Pyramid. And I thought, wow, I wonder what that means. And so when I went back to my accommodation, I just got inspired. I should look exactly at the routings between Sweden and India. And I realized that Egypt was almost perfectly halfway between the 2 points. So what I did was I looked for flights, and I found out that if I booked a flight from Sweden to Cairo and then a separate flight from Cairo to India, it was at least half the price of the direct flight. And so I had this place of openness. So I was like, okay, the universe has pointed me in a particular direction and given me a clue about something. So there's some experience for me, or there's something waiting for me in Egypt. And so I booked my flights and I flew down to Cairo. And Egypt's a very vast country, and there's so much to do there. And so my idea was, because I'd had that very clear image of the pyramid, that would be the focus of my trip there. So I had 1 week there. And I decided to stay out in Giza, right at the edge of the Gizan Plateau. And so my guest house, to give you some perspective, was from the roof of my guest house. The nose of the Sphinx was about 100 meters from the roof of the guest house. So when we see pictures of Cairo, the Gizan Plateau and the pyramids, it's always looking out towards the west. And so you don't realize how close all of the houses and the buildings in Giza are to the pyramids. They almost butt up right against them. And so we always see the pictures looking with the Sahara as the background. But in fact, if you look from the other direction, like the whole city of Cairo is just like bang, wedged up right against the pyramids, and these huge fences and walls to keep people out.
We need some Instagram pictures with that backdrop.
Yeah, from that perspective. You don't see that perspective. So I got there, and so my whole idea was simply to spend as much time as I could meditating and being present to this ancient sacred site, which obviously has profound mysteries and information going back thousands and thousands of years. And so every morning I would get up really early in the morning before the sun rose, and I would go up onto the rooftop, and I would sit there and I would meditate. And the sun was rising behind me in the east, and was rising, and you'd see it like come up, and it would hit the Sphinx, and then it would hit the Great Pyramids. There's the three main pyramids. And it was just such a magical place, because there's this great saying in Egypt, and that's man fears time fears the pyramids.
Whoa.
Because the pyramids are so ancient, and they're just so unchanging. They're just like, you could come back, you see photos from 100 years ago, from 1,000 years ago, if we had pictures, and you see that the pyramids are still there the exact same way that they were. So they're just such a timeless testament to mankind and to our innovation and to our creativity and ingenuity. And so we won't get into any of those sides of things. So that's a whole fascinating story of itself.
Yeah.
One of the things you start to find is your ability to meditate and be completely present in the moment is the one thing that could perhaps allow you to travel across space and time. Because your heart is the part of you that allows you to identify with others. It allows you to expand beyond your limited self and connect with things beyond you. So if you're really trying to connect with someone else, if you're simply thinking and in your mind and formulating ideas, there's never really a deep connection and bond. Whereas if you bring your awareness down into your heart center and operate from there, it's so easy and quick to make this really profound and deep connections with people. So the heart has this wonderful ability to take us beyond the limited space of the mind and the limitations of the mind and become connected with something much vaster. And so being at a place like this, where obviously thousands of people worked on creating these just amazing sites, over some period of time.
I thought it was just they're floating blocks of rock through the air. That's one story I heard.
There's many stories. But for today's story, I think that the idea that I want to get across is the power of the heart to connect you with others. But also, you can use that with creations. So if you see a beautiful creation and you want to in some way connect with the creator, there was another man, or let's say another artist or another person standing in front of that object at some time 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, working on that same object. And so there's some part of that creator embodied in the creation. And so if you want to travel across time, and I often do this when I go to museums or art galleries, is I'll try and connect myself through my heart to the creator of that artwork. And I try and see the world through his eyes. And it creates a really powerful experience. So I remember being at this beautiful exhibition of Indian sacred art. And in each of the paintings are beautiful in themselves, but I was trying to connect with the artist who created these images. And I was trying to see the world through his eyes, or their eyes. And it was amazing because I actually found myself standing in this gallery. This was in Canberra in Australia. And I was just thinking how wild it was that my painting that I'd done 500, 1,000 years ago, that was now in this amazingly futuristic building, like 1,000 years later, with like laser protection and, special
Lighting.
environmentally protective, glass and all of these things to protect my artwork. And I was simply a simple man or person going about creating these beautiful works of art. And then seeing it from his perspective of how wild it would be to know thousands of years, these radically different people are looking at his artwork and seeing the same profundity in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, that's such a wonderful thing because it stretches us from our limited self and connects us to something beyond ourselves.
So a museum is like a time travel machine.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
And so this is the wee story I want to tell. So the most famous museum in Cairo is called the Grand Museum. I think it's called the Grand Museum. And it's this very, very old museum. It's like, 100, 200, maybe 150 years old, let's say. And it's this big kind of pink stone building. And it's not like a museum in the modern sense. Like, obviously, if you go to a museum in Europe, everything is very, tightly controlled and very well curated. You go in here into the Grand Museum, and in some ways, it's like this giant Egyptian jumble sale. So there's rooms you go into and stuff's kind of in boxes, and it's really unclear what most things are. There's very little in the way of signage. But you'll go into a room, and it's just full of these amazing pieces of artwork from thousands of years ago. And they're not labeled, and they're not behind protective screens or glass. So these amazing stone carvings. And, people could just, if they wanted to, they could just walk up and touch them all. Because you've got giant sarcophagus and sarcophagi, perhaps the plural of sarcophagus, where the bodies were buried. There's pyramids, there's giant statues of all the gods and goddesses. And one thing that really strikes me about the Egyptian worldview that I think it's worth mentioning with regards to this as well is these people were so aware of death. Their lives were all focused about the moment of judgment when we pass away. And their whole society was structured in such a way that there was a right and correct way to live your life. And that was all to get you to the point when you face this judgment after your death, that you could face it and be in the best possible position to face this judgment. And it's amazing to think about as well, because these cultures, this Egyptian culture, lasted for thousands of years continuously. And it was the same culture. It did not vary drastically over long, long periods of time. So for thousands of years, people were living in this way. And their picture of the universe was that this place is a place of making moral decisions. So this world we're living in, the game here is to make the best possible moral decisions and live in harmony with some universal law. And the reason to do this is because when you die, you come through to the underworld. And there you meet this goddess, and I think it's the goddess Mut, M-A-T is the goddess's name. But basically, when you meet her, she has a scale, a balance scale, like one of those old balance scales. And what she does is she takes your heart and she puts it on the scale. And on the other side is a feather. And if your heart is weighing is heavier than a feather, so if you're and the amazing thing is we still have this idea in our culture. We talk about someone being light-hearted. And so this connects all the way back to that idea that you want your life you want at the end of your life, your heart to remain as light as a feather. And if your
heart is heavier,
if your heart is heavier, this giant monster comes and eats you.
Oh my God, that is so hard.
It's a really serious moment for these people. And so for thousands of years, they were playing the game of trying to act out these moral patterns in life so that when they died, they were a light-hearted person. And we say the same thing. We say, oh, this person's a bit heavy-hearted when they're carrying a lot of suffering and grief. You say, oh, that person has a heavy heart at the moment. So we still, that idea is still carried forward into our society today, which is amazing. It's like that idea is thousands and thousands of years old. And so I think that's really fascinating. So everyone, you should aim to remain lighthearted at all times. So you don't want the great monster to eat you on that day.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the monster may be more of an analogy, but anyway, it's a good one.
So I came into the museum and I was by myself. And normally, if I'm going to a museum, I'll walk around. And as my friends know, I often make them go to museums with me because I love them, and I love seeing humanity's creativity over time. And like I'll often, try and read some things to get a sense of the time and the place that's being represented there. But this museum doesn't really allow you to do that. There's not enough information there. So what I did was simply put on my headphones and I found some ancient Egyptian music. So I had the right soundtrack for this experience. So I had the music going, and I just simply put myself into my heart. I brought all of my awareness into the present moment. I didn't allow any thoughts. If thoughts came, I simply let them go and simply tried to remain pure, open awareness in the moment. And I just started walking around and I just came up to things and I would just try and connect with the energy and the feeling of all of these ancient objects. And so I'd been there for perhaps an hour and a half at this moment. And I remember walking upstairs and I remember feeling this profound moment of change and shift. And suddenly I felt like I was no longer walking on the floor. And so I was just doing what I'd been doing, like I was going around and trying to connect with and feel and expand myself, like go through the heart and expand and connect with all of these objects. And like I was having really nice, it was a really pleasant experience and really nice. But this moment, as I walked up the stairs and I started walking down this giant corridor, I suddenly felt like I wasn't walking on the ground anymore. I could feel my legs moving, but I felt so light. Like I felt as light as a feather. So there was some beautiful feeling of lightness, and it was like I was floating just above the surface of the ground. And so I'm walking around now, and as I get close to objects, as I come close to them, suddenly they're opening like a portal. And so I remember going up to this one sarcophagus, and as I come close to it, you can it's got a perspex screen around. You can kind of lean on it, get really close to it, and suddenly I was no longer myself looking at the sarcophagus. I was an ancient man standing with a chisel making the sarcophagus. And so I was chiseling away and working on this thing. And then suddenly that flipped and changed. And suddenly I was standing in a crowd of people and seeing the sarcophagus getting pulled into the right position. And so all of these experiences that are connected with this ancient object, I was suddenly experiencing this object through all of the experiences that people had had around it. So over thousands of years, these different people had interacted with this object. And somehow through the particular consciousness that I'd entered into, I was able to experience this object through the eyes of those people at those different times. And then I remember seeing it being taken and buried. And that started happening with every object I looked at. I started to see the object and experience it through the eyes of the creator and through the eyes of people who had seen it and used it and experienced it. There was all of these objects. And it was so wildly amazing and interesting and beautiful. And it was like nothing I had really ever experienced before. It was like suddenly like I was zooming from here to another time, to another time, to another time.
You're really in a time machine there.
It was really an amazing experience. And it's not the sort of thing that I was just imagining because it was happening so fast. I was back here, and then suddenly I was in another time looking at it from a different angle and a different perspective. And at some point it became so wildly overwhelming that I just simply had to it was almost like pull myself out of that state. I had to say, oh my God, like there's just so much, there's an infinite amount of information around me in every direction because every single object was existing here and now, but it was also existing, had its own story that was passing back thousands of years, and all of the people that had interacted with it. And I just got a glimpse in understanding how the great spiritual teachers and the great spiritual figures, how they experience the world. They're not trapped by the three dimensions of reality that we're existing in. And I was just amazed that they find a way to live in that space and still operate in the world. Because I started to realize, wow, like you kind of imagine, like, wouldn't it be great to have all these abilities and capacities to see these things and experience them? But when you actually have a glimpse of them, you realize it's like a whole different game. It's like a whole different level of experience.
Yeah, totally.
Most of us are not quite ready for.
I remember that somebody once asked Sri Chinmoy, can you do time travel as a realized master? And he said, yeah, it's actually very easy for realized souls to do time travel. So very interesting. I think that is maybe what you did at that moment. That was real time travel. So you're connected with the spirit of those times and with the actual reality.
Yeah.
And it was in the same location, but it was a different time.
Yeah, and so what I really got from it, though, is the power of bringing your full awareness into the moment. And if my thoughts were anywhere else, if even 10% of my awareness was somewhere else, I would never have been able to have those types of experiences. So there's something incredibly powerful about bringing all of your attention into the present moment. And like we say, often people think that the world's a little bit dull and boring. And really my answer to that is simply, if you feel as though any moment is dull and boring, you're not really there. You're somewhere else. It's like you're wishing you were doing something else. Your thoughts are taking you away. Your consciousness is pulling you back to some experience in the past or taking you to some experience.
Yeah, and that comes again back to the practice, because I think without a practice, it's very hard to be in the moment.
Yes.
You need to discipline your mind. You need to practice and work on your chisel away on your mind to make it calm and tranquil so that this awareness can blossom.
Yeah, and so that was the thing as well, and the connection through sound. Like, I think music and sound is such a great way to connect and to take us. So if you want to take your consciousness from your everyday awareness into some deeper, more profound state, it's often having the right sounds and music, because music is such a powerful vehicle for consciousness. And perhaps that's something that we should really delve into in a future episode, because, especially yourself, you're a great musician and you're someone who dedicates a lot of their spiritual practice, their sadhana, is through music. And
That's
so
true.
it'd be really, really cool, I think, to give people a glimpse into how you approach music from a real spiritual and a self-transcendence mindset.
We'll park it for the future for sure. Yeah. Did you have more experiences from that trip?
So that was the key experience for me in Egypt. And that experience is still transformative, and I still carry it with me today, because it just inspires me that everywhere I go, there's infinitely more going on there than you can see with normal human eyes.
There's so many layers of reality stacked on top of each other.
Yeah.
And if we are, that's why it's very often said that we are kind of caught in this three-dimensional reality. It's almost like a prison.
Yeah.
When you realize that there's so many layers out there that we can experience as well.
Yeah. And I actually have a really nice aphorism. I'm sorry, I'll just grab it. So this is an aphorism by Sri Chinmoy that talks a little bit about that concept. So the aphorism is, the man with no experience is stone blind. The man with experience possesses one eye. The man who has realization has two eyes. The man who cherishes union with the Supreme has three eyes. The man who will be able to possess a divinized body will have four eyes, and all the four eyes will guide the four directions.
That is from Sri Chinmoy?
Oh my God. That's from Sri Chinmoy.
Such an unusual aphorism. Is it from one of his series of poetry?
Yeah, it's from Flame Gold, Daily Meditations, Montreal, 1973.
Wow.
So
amazing.
That is a really profound and powerful encapsulation of this idea that we don't see the world. We start off and we're so blind. We're completely blind. We're lacking experience and wisdom and knowledge. And so we don't even see anything. We think we're seeing the world, but in reality, we're perhaps seeing our own projection of it. And then the man who has some experience and starts to learn some lessons, he suddenly has one eye. So he starts to see things, but still he's not seeing things correctly. They're out of balance. They're unclear, and they're not a full representation. And then Suddenly the man who's had some sort of spiritual awakenings or realizations, we can call them, suddenly he has two eyes. So he starts to see things with some depth and perspective. With one eye, you don't have any perspective. So if someone tries to
Sure, you
throw
can't
you a
see that.
ball, you're
Yeah.
all over the show. So suddenly with two eyes, you start to see some depth and perspective in things.
Yeah.
And then the man who cherishes union with the supreme. So someone who starts doing the spiritual practice and starts entering into a state of divine connection and union with that, suddenly they start to see with three eyes.
Well, isn't that the third eye right there?
It is. And so
Yeah.
the third eye is seen as the eye of vision. So it allows us to see the past, the present, the future. And as we already know,
But do you feel-
the past and the future don't even exist. So perhaps they
No,
just
no, no.
allow us to see the now correctly.
Do you feel that experience that you just described in Egypt was an opening of your third eye?
Yeah, it's nothing like any other experience I've had. So it's wildly interesting to me, and it's inspiring, and that it's a glimpse of some way of experiencing the world that like I think every deep spiritual experience, when you have it for the first time, is a glimpse of some future reality you will start living. And
Yeah.
I know the way I live now, if I knew what my life felt like now from a subjective experience, if I could step into that from when I was a 20-year-old, I would be amazed. I'd be amazed by the clarity of thought and the clarity of awareness and the ability to actually use my mind wisely. Like I didn't have that ability. Most of us are still struggling with that ability, but I've worked really hard on that, and so I have improved considerably, let's say.
Yeah.
But and that final line when you then have a divinized body, suddenly you then have four eyes.
So mysterious. So first of all, a divinized body. What do you make of that?
Yeah, so I think that's when you've brought your full spiritual consciousness, like your deepest, most profound spiritual consciousness. You've allowed that, you've identified with yourself with that so strongly that now permeates your entire being. And then that's what we say about holy people. And that's why you get these situations where people have the Buddha's toenail or the Buddha's, little finger. And it's this ancient relic because it's seen that it's become so divinized through his spiritual practices that even the physical body itself is embodying some divinity and some divine life.
Right.
And so, yeah, I've never come across that particular aphorism.
Then it goes into four directions, right? They see into four.
Which
So
is
that
it's
west, north,
that's
south?
another wildly. I mean, I think for me, it's talking about when you have a fully divinized body, you are receiving information from all sides, like at all times. So instead of just seeing the world through your two human eyes or seeing the world through your third eye, suddenly like every direction is feeding you information. It's like there's no part of you that is not aware and seen. And so, yeah, for me, it's so inspiring that because if you want to live a life of progress throughout your entire life, you need to live in a world and play a game where there is the potential to have those types of experiences. If the limits of human experience is just what we know and fractionally beyond that, that's not really that interesting. If you're really going to devote yourself to the spiritual life and the spiritual practices, and all you get is you see a little bit sharper, perhaps, or I don't think that's the type of vision that will really inspire you to really go all in on your spiritual practices. But when you start to see and hear that there's ways of living, and the ways of living here in the world, the same world that everyone else is living in, but you're experiencing it radically differently. You're seeing information in the world that other people are not seeing. You're experiencing types of experiences that other people are not experiencing. I think that's really interesting and exciting. And
so again,
that inspires
can you
me.
give a concrete example of that? What do you mean with these experiences?
So like a good example was from my own life here. So I run a shop, and as we've talked about, so I have my music store, and I was just thinking about that recently. I had this gentleman come in a few months ago, maybe just before Christmas, and he's a lovely, lovely man, and I've had some really nice interactions with him before. And as soon as I saw him, there was something in his field of energy that made me say to him, my friend, how is your relationship with God going? And he looked at me like with such a wonderful look of surprise and shock. And he said, why did you ask that question? Because at this time in my life, I've been really feeling this deep urge to really deepen my relationship with God and to really go much deeper and take it much more seriously, my spiritual life and my religious practices. And you may say, like, I would never normally ask that question to someone. I actually have never asked that question to anyone ever. So it was this one particular moment, and I felt in that moment that that was the exact right question to ask him. And then that carried on. He was looking around the shop and we continued talking, and he started talking to me about his spiritual or religious group he's a member of, that they don't have a priest here. And I said to him, oh, well, that's perfect, because you are the guy, you should become the priest. And then again, his jaw drops open. He said, how did you know that? Because he said, I've just been considering whether I should sign up and do the training to become a priest in this tradition. And so it was one of those things where...
Was it a Christian tradition or?
Yes, it was. Yeah, it was a Christian tradition. Yeah, and it's a beautiful thing. And I was so supportive and encouraging because I could see something about him, and the energy around him was carrying that energy. It was carrying that idea with it. And all I was simply doing was paying attention enough to become aware of those things. And if someone asked me how I knew to say those things, I'd liken it to if you asked me, how do I know what cinnamon tastes like? So if you had no sense of taste and I have a functioning sense of taste and I know what cinnamon tastes like, and you want to know, you tell me what cinnamon tastes like. How do I describe what cinnamon tastes like to someone who doesn't have that sense, who doesn't have a functioning sense that can experience cinnamon? And it's the same thing with these types of information. When you are working properly, when your whole system is working properly, and I know spiritual teachers have said this, in the beginning, these types of abilities seem like some sort of supernatural thing, but they're actually the most natural thing possible. And it's simply that we're out of tune with ourselves. And when we become fully present to our own potentiality, we'll all start having these experiences. We'll all start feeling these energies.
It's a case also of, intuition. It seems that, your intuition is telling you these things. And the more aware you are, the more clear-minded and sensitive to these things, the more it's like they become like a language that you learn to speak.
Yeah.
Almost.
Yeah. And I think the thing is, as well, as I don't claim any greatness for myself. I don't think, oh, wow, I'm amazing. Like I said the right thing at the right time. I think when you really start having the opportunity to say the right thing at the right time to the right person, if you're doing it well, you should feel incredibly humbled by the experience, because you should feel so incredibly grateful that the universe has found you fit to be the instrument, because that's all you're doing. You're simply being the instrument to say the right thing at the right moment to someone else. The information is not yours. The idea is not yours to give them, but perhaps you'll say something that they've been needing to hear and the universe hasn't been able to get through to them in other forms. And when you can really step out of your own way and allow yourself to just simply be spontaneous and natural and say the right thing in the moment, it becomes something that's so joyful, but also so incredibly humbling.
I had a really good experience of that many, many years ago. And I was coming out of the library in Amsterdam, and I saw a little kid by the side of the canal, and he was crying his eyes out. He was really, really sad and desperate. And I went over to him and said, what's the matter? And his bike had just been stolen.
Aww.
And he was maybe 8 years old or something, or 9. And he was totally upset because his bike, this was the second time already this month that it had happened. And his parents were quite poor. And he was just really upset of how his dad was going to react to that. So I just felt I have to bring this kid home. So I said, I offered him a ride home on my own bike. So I took him on the back of my bike, and it was quite a ways away from the center. The library was in the center. And I think we biked for like 15, 20 minutes. And we arrived at this little, and on the street where he lived. And his dad kind of came on the balcony. For some reason, he came out and he was on the balcony. And we started having this conversation. And I had never, of course, he was a complete stranger, and I was a complete stranger to him. But we started having this really deep conversation about God, basically, and about spiritual life, and about, he was saying, like, I'm praying to God every day, I'm placing my family there, and I don't know what to do. And I felt I just had to encourage him to say, you're doing the right thing, keep praying, and keep offering your family to the Supreme. And that was, I think, what he needed to hear. And I felt like you say, it was the right thing to do at the right time. And the little kid was so relieved, because I think the conversation also, it took away the anger of the man, because I was there and I explained the situation to him. And it was just one of those moments I would never forget it. It was such a spontaneous thing that happened. I had this little interaction with the man. And but these are such magical moments in life, right? When that happens.
They really are. And I think we undervalue them at our own peril, because I don't think we'll really truly know until well after this life to see really the full impact of our actions here. Because there's things that we might say and we might do that will ripple forward into time and space through other people, that will have results. They'll create results in the world that we could never imagine, and we'd never know the role that perhaps we played in them. Something good we said or something useful we shared with someone at some moment, how that can ripple off into their own life and change their direction and change experiences and realities. So each of us are playing such an interesting game where we're living our own lives and having our own personal, unique experiences, but we're also part of this great tapestry of lives. And all of these threads of life are all crossing over. And there's these beautiful moments of connection where we perhaps change the direction of trajectory of someone else's journey.
Yeah, and there was a story I remembered where Sri Chinmoy was going to Florida at some point to give a peace concert. And this was told by one of his students there. And she once told this story. It was amazing because the day after the concert, Chinmoy wanted to go to this local... No, they were driving, and all of a sudden Sri Chinmoy started giving directions. Go this way, go that way. And then they ended up at this kind of local market. It was an indoor market. So it was like in a kind of gym, big building. And there was all these little stalls. And Sri Chinmoy went in there, and Tilvala was just following him. And he was going for this aisle, then he was turning left. And all of a sudden, he ended up at this one stall. And there was this really kind of odd-looking, little bit of downtrodden gentleman. He was selling something there. It was really... And he was looking kind of like sad and a bit, didn't really take care of himself well. And Sri Chinmoy bought something from him and had a little exchange and then went out again. And the comment he gave in the car, because Tilvala was watching this, was that what happened there? And Sri Chinmoy looked over at her and he said, this was the reason Sri Chinmoy had to go to Florida. And that was all he would say. Isn't that wild?
This is the clue that the universe and the game we're playing is not quite the game we think we're playing at times.
Yeah.
The game of...
I mean, there's all the stories also from Krishna's time where, this person was like, had to be a stone for like decades. And then when Krishna came by and touched the stone, then the soul was released. There's all these stories of how spiritual masters sometimes, release.
Yeah.
Sometimes come by and release people from a certain karma.
Yeah.
I think it was one of those stories, really.
Yeah. So I'll finish off with one little story that carries on this theme we've been talking about, because I think it's a really nice theme. And so I left Egypt and I flew to India. And so there's probably two important stories with this, because one of the most important experiences was that at that point in my life, I still traveled with check-in luggage. So I checked my bag in at Cairo airport. And it turns out that Cairo airport, just like, the desert sands, it's like got some sort of sinking sand or quicksand there. And sometimes a lot of luggage goes in and it sinks into this quicksand and it never comes out again. And so at the moment I checked my bag in, it's funny, I looked at it and I saw it going away and I felt as though there's something slightly wrong with the situation. Like I saw it going away and there's something about the bag tag. It was really unclear what it was, but I just felt like there's something not quite right about this situation. And that was the last time I ever saw my suitcase. And so in my suitcase was all of my running gear, all of my gear for the mountains. And so I was heading to India and I was planning to head up into the Himalayas. And I was going to have some adventures and running and visiting being a pilgrim and visiting holy sites. And all of this equipment for that is in my suitcase. I arrive in India and it's one of those things, you arrive on a late night flight and then you wait and then your bag doesn't arrive. And they say, okay, it's probably going to be coming tomorrow. So I stay another day in Delhi. And then the next day they say, oh, it's probably going to come tomorrow on the next flight. And so again, I stay another day. And so at some point, the days are going on and you can't call them, they can only call you, the baggage department there. So every day I was waiting for this one magical call where they'll call me at some random time of the day and they'll tell me what's going on with my bag. And so for the first few days, they were very confident, the bag's going to come, it's definitely going to come, it's definitely going to come. And then as the days are passing by, I start to realize that I need to get on with my life here. I can't just stay here and wait for my baggage. And so I had to almost inwardly decide that on a particular day, I'm simply leaving Delhi and I'm flying out of there, whether my luggage arrives or not. And So it turns out in the end that the luggage is never to be found. And so what was important for me is that I was so happy actually about that, because what it did for me was it gave me the experience of losing everything that I had with me. Like I had my carry-on bag, so I maybe had my computer and I had, a few small items, but basically all of my stuff I'd been traveling with for many months has now completely disappeared. And it's a lot of my favorite things as well. So before I go, I'll be very intentional and just bring all the best things that I want to have with me, like my best waterproof jacket and my best shoes and like all of these things. And suddenly in one moment, for all of that to disappear is such a great thing, because it allows you to see, am I in some way relying on the things in my life for some level of happiness and security? And we try and think like, no, like it's the things are not important. It's like the connections and my actions and my, whether I'm living in alignment with my values. Like these are the most important things. But you're never really sure until all of your stuff completely disappears in one moment. And so
I have an aphorism about that.
Yeah.
This is from Sri Chinmoy. I remembered this because it happened to me once, and it was so appropriate.
Yeah.
In the spiritual life, when you lose a material object, it is no harm. Rather, it can be a great blessing.
Yeah. So this is the thing. I felt like I gained so much more from losing my bag than I would have from my bag arriving. If my bag had arrived, I would have just carried on, and the universe would have been exactly the same and just how I imagined it to be. The fact that my bag did not arrive suddenly meant I was living in a new type of universe that was different, because I expected my bag should arrive. And that was my first and only time I've really lost my luggage. And at that time, there was a lot of luggage getting lost all around the world. And so it was a common problem. But what it did was really allowed me to test myself. It was like, okay, can I be completely happy without any of those things? Can I just walk away and leave those things? And so I ended up just buying a small carry-on bag in central Delhi and Chandni Chowk. Brought a new pair of running shoes, brought a jacket, brought some running shorts, and was like, right, I go, and then I booked a flight up to Kashmir and flew off before I'd even heard whether my luggage was coming or not, because I was simply in a place where it was like, my life is a flow and it needs to move on. So that was a really useful moment where the spiritual...
Kind of hard to make that decision though, to go like from one moment to the next, okay, I'm giving up the bag, I'm giving up all the things. It's like this moment when you have to renounce the world in the spiritual
and it was actually, it's such actually incredible relief. Because there's an ancient Stoic idea as well, that anything bad that you imagine, tell yourself it's already happened. And then what that does is it takes away the worry or the fear of like, oh, is it going to happen or is it not going to happen? Like, is my bag lost or is it going to be found? If you just tell yourself it's already lost, it's already gone, it actually takes away your mind's ability to worry about the two potential outcomes, because it collapses it into one state. It says, right, it's already happened, it's gone, I move on. It frees up. It does, like sometimes I remember having experiences where maybe I'm in a foreign country and I've got a rental car. Like a good example is in San Francisco, because San Francisco, there's always problems with cars getting broken into. And so I remember going for runs and I'd left the car, and then my mind might think, oh, did I remember to lock the car? And so, oh my God, what happens if someone steals the car? And so these thoughts start playing in my mind. And I'd simply go, the car's already been stolen. It's already gone. And then suddenly I'm like, oh, okay, well, that's fine. It's like there's already an outcome. It's like I don't need to worry about the potentiality. It's like Schrodinger's cat. Is the cat alive or dead? I'll just say, the cat's already dead. Let's just move on.
It's dead. Who cares?
And so
another more positive way to deal with disappointments would be to say, things could always be worse. Like, yes, I like that.
I do like that. And like when you still have your health, or you still have something that you really are grateful for, it's so easy to leave behind these other things. And the great thing is that at the end of your days, you will leave behind every single thing. And so I really like the idea that it's better to live many small deaths through your life than suffer one catastrophic death at the end of your life.
What is many small deaths? What is
so
that?
The small deaths is each time you lose something, you let go of something, like some ability or some capacity. So instead of trying to sort of ignore it or not pay it attention, like celebrate it. It's like, okay, this part of my life is gone. Like it's gone, and that part of me, is passed behind the curtain of eternity, we could say.
Yeah.
And so you're having these small letting goes along the way, rather than this one final catastrophic hanging on for dear life to life. And that really causes suffering, because that's that resistance of the experience. Death is something that if you can accept it, I think it becomes very natural. But as soon as you fight against it and resist it, that's where you cause suffering. But what was really cool about that experience of having a few extra days in Delhi is I had one really special day, and it was a special day for me in my spiritual life. And so I wanted to do something very sacred and special. And so I'm in Delhi, and I'm thinking, what would be a great way to celebrate this very sacred, auspicious day? So I thought, what I want to do is I want to visit as many different types of holy places as I can, and go there and pray and meditate.
We were acting like a tourist there a little bit.
So I wanted to have, I was looking for transformative experiences there, though, and I was open to whatever happened along the way. So on that day, I went to the Red Mosque, I went to a Shiva temple, I went to a Jain temple, I went to a Christian church. I went
to make pictures.
I went to a Gurdwara, and all of them, I wanted to really consecrate this day and make it as sacred as possible. So that was a way that came to me to make this day as special and sacred. So each of these places I went and meditated and prayed. And one that really struck me was the Jain temple, because Jain temples are not very common. Like if you go to India, you'll see many mosques and a lot of Hindu temples of all denominations and all styles, but not so many Jain temples. So this Jain temple is right in the heart of central Delhi in Chandni Chowk, and it's packed with people there. And there was this really nice attendant guy. He was a little bit simple, and so there's normally an attendant who looks after the shoes. So you take your shoes off outside before you enter the temple. And so he saw me and saw I was not from these parts. And so he took it upon himself to show me around the temple. And he was a very simple man. And I could tell in some way that he was living at the temple. So he had obviously some hardship and struggles in life. And this was one place that had welcomed him and accepted him. And so he'd found a place here. And in return for having a place to stay, he was looking after the pilgrims who came. And so he took me underneath the temple. There was this really sacred cave where you could go in and meditate. And so there was no one in there. So I'm in this magical cave underneath the temple meditating. And so the Jains rigorously believe in nonviolence. And so I was sitting there meditating, and then I hear this mosquitoes buzzing around me. And at some point, I'm about to squash it. And then I think, oh my God, no, I'm in the Jain temple. It would have been such a sacrilegious moment to kill a mosquito in the Jain temple. So luckily I did not, the mosquito was completely unharmed. And so I'd had this really beautiful day visiting all these sacred places. And at the end of the day, I was heading back towards my accommodation, and I was happening to walk past the same temple again. And so the shoe attendant saw me, and he recognized me. And he said, please, sir, please, can I come with you? I want to make sure I keep you safe. And I said to him, okay, I was quite confident and comfortable where I was, and it wasn't a dangerous place. And I'm comfortable and confident in these situations. I understand the ways of the place there. And I said, I don't need any help at the moment, but if you want to come with me, that's fine. And so I wanted to visit one more temple. So I visited that temple, and he followed me around and stood right next to me at each of the shrines. And so I was trying to meditate, and he was just standing there staring at me. And at some point I said, okay, thank you. And each time I was meditating, he would try and tell me, oh, this one here, this is Shiva, this is Lord Shiva. I said, yes, thank you, my friend. No, so because I could feel his good nature and his good heart. He was really trying to be of service.
But he was also a bit obnoxious.
So he just didn't understand what I was doing or what I was trying to experience. And so that was totally fine. Like he had his own viewpoint and his own experiences that had led to him to being who he was. And so we were in this temple, and in each shrine, there's many shrines there, and I was meditating in each of them. And he would stand there and look at me and try and tell me, it's okay, please, my friend. And so at some point I had to say, my friend, just please, let us be silent. Let us enjoy the silence. And he would I could see him like tensing up his face to try and hold it in. And then after like a minute, he would blurt something out again. And so this was going on and on. And so I thought, okay, this is my dharma. This is some experience I'm meant to be having here. And so we leave, and we're walking down the main shopping street in Chandni Chowk. And so there's millions of people. It's like so densely packed. And so he's walking right next to me, and he keeps on telling me, hey, no, don't walk over there, walk over here. No, don't go stand there. And so he's constantly pulling at my attention. And at some point, I realized this is like our relationship, our path together had ended. Like we needed to go our separate ways again. And so I said to my friend, thank you so much for your help. but I'm fine now. Like, I'll be okay. Like, I'm heading back to my accommodation. I don't need your help. And immediately I sensed that he felt it as this great rejection. And so immediately he started getting upset and angry and agitated. He said, no, 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 I have to help you. I have to help you. And he started really shouting. And so everyone started looking. And so we're in this really busy place. And it's this very unusual relationship between this Westerner and this younger Indian man. And the Indian man starting to shout, and it's getting really, really worked up and really emotional. And in that moment, I put all of my attention onto him. I really paid my full, undivided attention to him. And I could see and feel inside him a great longing for love and connection. I could feel like a tremendous tragedy and sadness within his past. So perhaps he'd been orphaned, which is not so uncommon in a place like India. And he'd ended up living on the streets, and he'd found this temple that had taken him in. But all he really wanted to do was feel loved and feel like that his life had some meaning and some purpose. And I could see all of that and all of this emotion. It wasn't me per se, but it was all of this bottled up emotion that he had from his past experiences and the trauma. And he was starting, his arms were coming up above his head, and he was really shouting at me. And so I knew I needed to somehow, on some deep level, I needed to transform the situation. So I just stepped in towards him as close as I could. I put my hand out, and I just put my hand really powerfully on his heart center. And I just said to him with like full sincerity and like all the power I could muster, I said, I love you. I love you. I love you. And I was really speaking to his soul. It was not about the person and the personality, but it was like my soul recognizing his soul. And when I put my hand on him, I felt this tremendous sense of energy coming through my body and like entering into him. And I could see as soon as I started saying, I love you, his hands were above his head. And then suddenly he was like a little puppy dog. He just like melted. He just like melted down, and just every part of his being just went all soft and gooey, and he just totally relaxed. And so there was some deep unmet need that he was struggling with. And to be able to be there with him and not just
what a beautiful story.
And like, because normally you would say, like, just go away, stop bothering me. You're like, you're a pain. You're ignoring me. Like, get out of here. But that would not be valuing the soul, the spirit that existed within him, that was just wanting to feel a moment of love and connection. And it was so funny because after that, I just said to my friend, I will go now. And he said, yes, 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 please. And so we just walked off in different directions. And it was like from such a wild, out of control situation to such a beautiful resolution. It was like everything resolved itself so wonderfully in that moment.
So a fantastic manual for if you have to deal with obnoxious people. Just put the hand on their heart, say 3 times with all sincerity, I love you, and all your problems are solved.
And that's another thing. Like, these are all things that are total one-offs. Like, this is not a habit I'm in. I'm not normally talking to the bus driver and then I immediately put my hand on his heart. This is like a very particular solution to a very particular problem.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's when the spiritual life becomes wildly interesting. When you start to find that every situation has a key. Every situation has a way to resolve it in the most beautiful and the most sublime way possible. And often we don't choose that way because we can't see it. So we end up caught in the human game and we start arguing. And I could have easily shouted back at him and just pushed him, told him, go away.
No,
and
true.
It would have been a really ugly situation. So And I walked away and I was just filled with the sense of just so much gratitude, like so humbled and so grateful to have been able to be of service.
That was one of those moments when you pass behind the curtain of eternity, when when you die, this will come back to you. This is like, this moment, man, that was a real biggie.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah.
So, so I've got some other amazing stories about getting arrested by the police up high in the mountains, but we're going to talk about that another day.
Yeah, let's save this for another day. I know that story. It's an unbelievable story. So it's a good cliffhanger
ending
for the next episodes. But wow, thanks so much for sharing. That was really amazing. And I love how you tie in the spiritual lessons to these really, very down-to-earth, mundane experiences of your travels. And at the same time, they lift those experiences to a higher level and kind of show us that there is so much. The cosmic game is so layered and beautiful and rich. And thanks for sharing that. That was wonderful.
No, thank you. It's always really fun just to relive some of these moments because they are real and very personal and very beautiful moments in my life. And so I'm always very lucky and grateful to be able to share them with someone else.
Super. Okay, thank you for listening, dear listeners, and appreciate you for being with us all this way. And again, if you like our podcast, please consider subscribing, leave a comment or tell a friend, and we'll see you again next week. Thank you.
Thank you.